You've probably noticed it how some people move through life as if carrying an invisible flame, a quiet kind of fire that doesn't roar but refuses to die. Even when the wind rises, even when everything around them says, stop trying. And maybe, in your quieter moments, you've wondered why. Why do some people fall once and never stand again, while others fall 1,000 times and rise as if it's their first attempt? Why do some break under the pressure of a single disappointment, while others walk through storms with a strange sort of calm, as if the chaos itself is guiding them somewhere deeper? You've seen it in strangers, in stories, maybe even in the mirror, this paradox of human persistence. This mystery of grit that science studies but the heart feels long before the mind understands. Perhaps you've asked yourself, is it discipline? Is it destiny? Is it a delusion? Is it something coded in the body, or something whispered to the soul? And underneath it all, a quieter question breathes. Why do you keep going, even when you don't know why? There is a moment maybe you've lived it when the world blurs, when the path ahead disappears, when the weight becomes too much and the reasons become too few. And yet, something inside you refuses to collapse. Something ancient, something instinctive, something undeniably alive. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it simply insists, not yet. And so you rise again, not because you're unbreakable, but because something in you believes there is more. More to learn, more to see, more to become. And perhaps that is where the science of persistence begins, not in strength, but in the soft, trembling decision to try again. So before we continue, pause with this question: what is that tiny, stubborn spark inside you trying to tell you? You move through your days believing you're awake, believing you're choosing, believing you're steering your life with full awareness, but if you look closely, you start to see the truth. Most people are barely conscious at all. They rise with alarms they didn't choose, step into routines they didn't question, and follow expectations they never agreed to. You watch them in the morning rush, eyes half open, minds already overwhelmed by tasks, messages, deadlines. They move like ghosts wrapped in flesh, breathing, walking, smiling en quiet. Their souls are somewhere far away, waiting for permission to return. And maybe you've felt it too, that sense of drifting through your own story as if someone else wrote the script. You sit at a table with friends, everyone laughing, scrolling, performing tiny versions of themselves. And in a sudden flash of clarity, you realize everyone is acting. Everyone is pretending. Everyone is doing what they think they're supposed to do. You watch the way people talk about dreams they never chase, the way they settle for lives that quietly suffocate them, the way they cling to comfort even when comfort is killing their courage. You see a father rushing home from work, exhausted, unaware that his child is studying his face, learning from him what grown-up life looks like. You see coworkers nodding along in meetings, not because they agree, but because speaking up requires waking up, and waking up is frightening. You see families sitting together but living worlds apart, their attention consumed by glowing screens that promise connection but deliver only noise. You see the illusion everywhere, that people are choosing their lives, when in truth their lives are choosing them. And yet, beneath this silent sleepwalking, you sense a deeper truth. Most people don't stay unconscious because they're weak, but because awakening would demand something from them. A change, a confrontation, a kind of courage that disrupts the entire architecture of who they believe themselves to be. And that disruption is terrifying. So they float instead. They drift through years as if they are waiting for a sign, waiting for clarity, waiting for some inner permission that never arrives. But then there is you, the one who notices, the one who feels the tension between who you are and who you pretend to be. And the moment you notice, the illusion cracks. You begin to sense the world behind the world, the quiet layers beneath people's words, the hidden exhaustion behind their smiles. You start to see what others ignored, because you're better, but because you're paying attention. And from that awareness comes a choice: to continue drifting with the unconscious crowd, or to awaken and face the weight of your own potential. But awakening is a threshold, and crossing it changes everything. So before we step into that moment, ask yourself, are you ready to see what lies beyond the illusion? There comes a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when the world tilts. It doesn't announce itself with thunder or revelation. Instead, it arrives like a soft crack in the familiar, a small fracture in the pattern of your life. Maybe it happens on a random afternoon, when you pause long enough to feel something you've ignored for years. Maybe it happens during a conversation that suddenly feels hollow, or while staring at the ceiling late at night, when the silence becomes louder than your thoughts. But in that moment, you awaken, not fully, not dramatically, but unmistakably. Something shifts. You begin to see through things you once took at face value. The forced laughter, the unspoken disappointment, the hidden loneliness in the people you care about. You sense the tension between the life you're living and the life you're capable of. It feels like standing at the edge of a cliff, not in fear, but in recognition: I can't go back to sleep. And with that realization comes both power and pain. Because once you see more, you feel more. You become aware of your patterns, your fears, your self-sabotage. You notice where you shrink yourself, where you repeat old wounds, where you abandon your own potential to keep the peace. And suddenly, the illusion you lived in feels too small, too dim, too suffocating. But awakening also brings danger, the danger of becoming hyper-aware, of reading too deeply into everything, of noticing truths you're not yet ready to hold. You begin to see the mechanics of your relationships, the emotional choreography in every room, the silent struggles behind people's eyes. This awareness is a gift, but also a burden. You're no longer able to pretend. You're no longer able to play along. You've stepped into a world where the surface can no longer satisfy you. And yet, beneath the confusion, there is a strange kind of hope. Because awakening is not the end, it's the beginning. It's the moment the ground beneath your feet stops being predictable and becomes something alive, something inviting, something demanding your full presence. And though part of you feels unprepared, another part, older, wiser, whispers that this is what you were meant to find. The question now is not whether you've awakened. It's whether you're ready to walk where this awakening leads. Awakening is often described as a gift, but what few people tell you is that the first thing it gives you is loneliness. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, but the deeper, quieter kind of loneliness of seeing what others don't, feeling what others ignore, and understanding what others aren't ready to face. It's the loneliness of sitting in a room full of people you love and realizing you can no longer unsee the truth behind their words. You notice the exhaustion in their jokes, the fear behind their confidence, the longing behind their indifference. You watch them cling to beliefs that keep them safe, routines that keep them numb, expectations that keep them predictable. And a part of you wants to reach across the table and say, "Wake up, there's more." But another part of you knows that awakening is not something you can give. It's something each person must stumble into on their own. So you sit with that knowledge, feeling the distance grow, not because you've pulled away, but because your awareness has moved you to a different altitude. And at higher altitudes, the air is thinner. Conversations feel different. Interactions feel heavier. Silence feels sharper. You begin to feel like a foreigner in your own life, fluent in a language that no one around you seems to understand. And in that isolation, many people break. They go back to pretending. They shrink themselves. They dim their awareness just to feel the warmth of belonging again. But some, perhaps you choose to stay awake, even when it hurts. You begin to realize that seeing deeply is both a blessing and a responsibility, because when you see beyond the surface, you see the hidden emotional architecture holding people together. You see a mother who smiles but carries the weight of unspoken sacrifices. You see a friend who jokes too loudly to hide how fragile he feels. You see a coworker who acts strong because falling apart would break her completely, and you begin to carry all of it not because you want to, but because you can't help but feel it. Your sensitivity becomes a radar, tuned to the quiet suffering of others. And that sensitivity isolates you. But here's what's most surprising. Your awareness doesn't just separate you from others. It separates you from your old self. You can no longer hide behind the illusions that once protected you. You can't unsee your patterns, your lies, your habits, your fear. This is why awakening feels like losing home, because you are losing a home, the home of who you used to be. And so begins the solitude of transformation. You walk through days with a strange ache in your chest, knowing that growth is costing you something precious, your old sense of belonging. Yet, in that ache, there is a quiet truth forming itself. Isolation is not punishment. It is preparation. You are being rearranged from within, made stronger, sharper, more honest. But transformation always begins with separation. And now that you've stepped into this lonely doorway of awareness, the question emerges from the silence around you. What will you do with everything you now see? Awareness is not a peaceful thing. It stirs you, stretches you, corners you. Once you begin to see the world and yourself with unfiltered clarity, you are forced into a quiet war within. It is the conflict between what you know and what you can no longer pretend not to know. You start noticing moments when you could speak up, when you could intervene, when you could challenge patterns that harm you or the people you care about. You feel the urge to step in, to guide, to correct, to lift others out of the illusions they're drowning in. But at the same time, you feel the weight of the truth. Awakening does not grant you the right to fix others. Wisdom does not give you authority. Love does not give you control. And so you stand in the doorway between two worlds, one where you say everything you see, and another where you swallow it all, protecting the fragile structures people cling to. It becomes an emotional tug-of-war. You want to help, but helping too directly would break someone. You want to tell the truth, but truth spoken too soon becomes violence. You want to save others, but you're learning that saving people who aren't ready is another form of harm. And then there is the conflict within yourself, the version of you that wants to rise, evolve, transform, and the version of you that wants to retreat into the comfort of who you used to be. You feel torn between the safety of your old patterns and the uncertainty of your growth, between silence and expression, between staying and leaving, between being understood and being authentic. Sometimes you catch yourself rehearsing what you'll say, imagining the conversations where everything finally becomes honest. Other times you imagine disappearing into the background, saying nothing at all, letting the world remain as it is. But both options feel incomplete, unsatisfying, imbalanced. This inner conflict is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign that you have outgrown the simple answers. You are learning the delicate art of carrying truth without weaponizing it, feeling deeply without drowning in it, caring without controlling. And yet, part of you aches with the burden of knowledge. What you see, what you sense, what you feel, none of it fits neatly into your old life. This is the threshold where many people turn back. But you, standing here, torn but awake, have a different question to face. How do you continue when both silence and truth feel like they cost you something? There comes a point in every awakening where the weight becomes too much, not because you are weak, but because you have been carrying more than any one heart was designed to hold. The sensitivity that once felt like a gift becomes a burden. The awareness that once felt enlightening begins to drown you. You start absorbing emotions that aren't yours, intuitions you didn't ask for, truths you can't escape. Every room feels louder. Every conversation feels heavier. Every silence feels sharper. It's as if your mind is running 20 tabs at once, none of which you can close. You begin to feel overstimulated by life itself. Your thoughts become a storm, circling the same questions, the same uncertainties, the same unbearable insights. You feel responsible for everything you understand, yet powerless to act on most of it. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, a crack forms inside you. The collapse doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't come with shattered glass or desperate screams. It looks like exhaustion you can't explain. It looks like staring at the wall, unable to process one more emotion. It looks like overthinking until your chest tightens. It looks like caring so deeply that you begin to disappear into the very feelings you're trying to manage. It looks like holding yourself together so tightly that you forget how to breathe. Your awareness becomes a mirror that reflects everything except yourself. You lose track of where other people end, and you begin. You give until there is nothing left. You understand until you forget to feel. You become the quiet container for everyone else's storms. Until you realize a storm has been forming inside you the whole time. And when the collapse finally arrives, it's not a dramatic explosion, it's a surrender, a silent unraveling, a moment where you whisper, "I can't keep doing this." Not because you don't want to grow, but because you've tried too hard for too long without remembering that even those who never give up must rest. The collapse teaches you what awakening never revealed, that awareness without boundaries becomes self-destruction, and compassion without limits becomes self-erasure. And in the quiet aftermath of this emotional breaking, a new question rises from the root, a question that feels different, softer, necessary. If you continue like this, what part of you will you lose next? But collapse, as devastating as it feels, has a strange way of clearing the noise. When everything falls apart inside you, something unexpected happens. You finally hear the truth that was whispering beneath all the chaos. At first, it arrives gently, almost shyly, like a quiet voice asking you to sit down for the first time in years. It tells you something you've resisted your entire life. You are not here to carry everything. You are not here to save everyone. You are not here to absorb every emotion, solve every problem, interpret every silence, or be the emotional spine of every room you walk into. The revelation doesn't shout, it unfolds. You begin to realize that the strength you admired in others, the people who never give up, is not made of endless effort. It's made of boundaries. The strongest people are not the ones who fight until they break. They are the ones who know when to pause, when to release, when to protect their energy the way a flame protects itself from the wind. You realize that persistence without self-understanding becomes punishment, and endurance without intention becomes suffering. True resilience isn't about pushing harder, it's about aligning yourself with what actually matters. Slowly, you start to see the architecture of a different life emerging. A life where you don't chase every responsibility. A life where you don't force connections, over-explain yourself, or justify your sensitivity. A life where you recognize that your awareness was never meant to be a burden. It only became one because you were trying to carry it alone. You realize that you can care deeply without drowning. You can love without losing yourself. You can help without absorbing. You can witness suffering without becoming its home. You learn that letting go is not giving up, is choosing where your strength belongs. And as this wisdom settles into your bones, something shifts inside you. The heaviness begins to lift. The emotional noise begins to quiet. The world doesn't feel as sharp, as overwhelming, as impossible. You start to feel present, again, lighter, grounded, aware, without being consumed. And perhaps for the first time, you understand the true science behind why some people never give up. It's not because they are fearless, or ruthless, or endlessly tough. It's because they have learned the balance between holding on and letting go. They know when to push, when to wait, when to rest. They know that resilience isn't a constant sprint, it's a rhythm, a dance, a negotiation between the heart and the world. And now that you've walked through illusion, awakening, isolation, conflict, and collapse, you are finally ready for the deeper truth that waits at the end of every transformation. Awareness is not meant to break you, it's meant to rebuild you. But the final step is still ahead. The step where everything you've learned becomes part of who you are. So ask yourself one last time before we continue, are you ready to integrate what you've discovered? Integration is where everything you've been through, the illusion, the awakening, the loneliness, the conflict, the collapse, the revelation finally comes together and becomes something living inside you. It's not dramatic. It's not cinematic. It's quiet, steady, almost imperceptible, like watching dawn slowly dissolve the darkness. You begin to understand that growth was never about becoming someone else. It was about remembering who you were before the world taught you to shrink. You start to see that your sensitivity is not a flaw, but a compass. Your awareness is not a burden, but a light. Your resilience is not loud or heroic, it's the quiet decision you make each day to meet yourself honestly, without running, without pretending. Integration feels like breathing fully for the first time in years. It feels like standing in your life with both feet, not apologizing for your depth or your intensity or your intuition. You start setting boundaries, not from fear, but from clarity. You begin choosing people not because they need you, but because they meet you. You stop judging yourself for caring deeply, and instead, you learn to channel that care into places that nourish you. You realize that being someone who never gives up doesn't mean exhausting yourself, it means understanding your limits, honoring your needs, resting when you must, rising when it's time, and knowing that persistence is sustainable only when it is rooted in self. You stop trying to save the world, and instead save your energy for what truly matters. You stop trying to be understood, and instead try to understand yourself. You stop trying to hold everything, and instead hold only what is yours. And slowly, without forcing it, your life begins to align. Your relationships shift. Your choices sharpen. Your mistakes teach you instead of haunting you. Your emotions guide instead of overwhelm. You begin to move differently, steadier, calmer, with a quiet confidence that comes from having fallen apart and rebuilt yourself from the inside out. And in that stillness, you realize something profound. The science behind why some people never give up is not about strength at all, it's about integration. It's about bringing every part of yourself into harmony so that persistence becomes natural, not forced. So that endurance becomes wisdom, not suffering. So that you move forward not because you're afraid to stop, but because your life is finally aligned with who you truly are. And as you reach this final moment, you return to the paradox from the beginning, the tiny, stubborn spark inside you. Now you understand, it wasn't asking you to push harder. It was asking you to come home to yourself.